Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for More Than Just Events, Unlocking the Power of Institutional Marketing, presented by Dan Hoover. I am Lisa Smalls, Director of Arts, Resilience, and Sustainability at South Arts. I am an African American woman with long blonde braids, and I am wearing blue glasses with multicolored specs and a blue denim dress. Before we begin, I'd like to offer some helpful tips for today's session. To turn on captions, click the Show Captions button in the meeting controls. If needed, choose the language for the captions if it's different from the default. Please place all questions in the Q&A pod. We want to reserve the chat for interaction with the slides and for conversation and connection with the group. A recording of today's webinar will be housed on the South Arts website in our resources section, and registrants will also receive the link and today's presentation materials via email. Lastly, when prompted, please scan the QR code or use the link in the chat to complete a brief survey to help us better serve the field's needs and interests. South Arts empowers artists and arts administrators by expanding access to professional development opportunities. Our free Field Building webinar series offers timely, topic-driven sessions that respond to the evolving needs of the field, providing practical tools, insights, and industry best practice. South Arts receives support from the National Endowment for the Arts through a partnership agreement to produce webinars such as these and conduct additional programs for our constituents across the region. Please visit our website as well as the NEA's website for additional information and opportunities. With no further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon and excited to talk about unlocking the power of institutional marketing. To kind of set the table for today's webinar, my role is the Director of Strategy at Cyberwoven, which is a brand web and marketing firm based in Columbia, South Carolina. And we have the pleasure of working with numerous cultural institutions around the country, including South Arts. And so it was a pleasure to be asked to participate in this webinar series. In terms of giving you a roadmap for our time together today, just wanted to kind of start with some definitions around what is institutional marketing and looking at some core principles, but then to turn the lens to why it's important and matters to organizations and individuals in the arts. And then to spend the latter part of our time together looking at strategies that allow us to build long-term engagement with the organizations that we represent. And in particular, obviously with marketing content driving a lot of what we do day to day, looking at the importance of the right content mix, and just to round out our time together with some practical tools and templates that might be able to help all of you guide action in your day-to-day experience. So thinking about institutional marketing and just pulling a definition forward for us to consider, when we think about institutional marketing, it's really a strategic approach that puts the lens on the entire organization or institution rather than a specific product, service, or event. And so by nature of today's title, more than just events, one of the things that's easy about an event to communicate is it very quickly answers the questions of who, what, where, why, when, and how. Whereas institutional marketing starts to become a little more difficult to give form to. And so when we think about key characteristics of institutional marketing, we're starting to think at a higher level around what our mission is, what our vision is, what type of culture are we trying to engender in the work that we do, and then ultimately, when people interact with us, how does that shape their understanding of us and by extension, our reputation in the world? And so at the heart of institutional marketing is really a goal of fostering loyalty and trust in the institution rather than trying to generate an immediate result. And we'll look at how the two work together. There are occasions, obviously, where we're trying to generate immediate results, but they happen in a context of a relationship with your various audiences. And so we want to make sure that as we look at institutional marketing, we are building that trust that allows future engagement to be more effective. And so, in a nutshell, institutional marketing is going to focus on things like our values, how we've made contributions to the world, and how our work might be impacting the various stakeholders we serve. And so, if we were to put kind of a word around kind of the goal of institutional marketing, it is a trust building enterprise where we want the people that we work with to ultimately understand um, who we are, what we do, and why it matters to them, and how it's helping the wider world. And so, just um, by way of contrast, it might be helpful to think about institutional versus product marketing. And obviously, an event could be, in the broadest sense, considered a product. So, when you look at the focus of institutional marketing, we're thinking about the whole, the entire organization, and how it's perceived in the world. Whereas the focus of product marketing is often on a specific service, product, or program. Thinking in terms of goals, if you're doing institutional marketing, what are you measuring? So measuring things like people knowing who you are and what you do, measuring perception, whether people have trust in you, whether they feel like you're creating value in the community, and credibility when you speak. Is your voice a voice that's given space to be heard? Whereas the goal of product marketing often is something that tends to be more transactional and measurable, something like selling a product or signing someone up for a class, or a newsletter or something of that nature. The other piece that institutional marketing does create a little space between itself and product marketing is what kind of messaging we want to lean into. So with institutional marketing, we're thinking in terms of mission-driven language, value-based messages, whereas in product marketing, it starts to be more feature benefit oriented. What are the benefits to the person? What are maybe features that allow you to stand out from alternatives? And finally, thinking about timeline and audience, institutional marketing by the nature of kind of what it's doing tends to be longer term. It's something that you have to do over time to ultimately shape understanding. And many of the tactics that are going to be appropriate for institutional marketing are going to capture a broad range of stakeholders, whereas product marketing tends to be more short and midterm, where you're hitting a focused audience to drive some particular outcome. So thinking about institutional marketing specifically and how it shows up in the world in contrast to product marketing, the heart of institutional marketing kind of resides on the brand identity. And when we talk about brand identity, we're thinking in terms of how you're perceived in the world. And so institutional marketing is trying to elevate the organization's reputation beyond a particular performance or exhibition. Those things could be evidence of the work you're doing, but they're not the focus of the institutional marketing. We want the focus to be on the organization's reputation. The other piece is institutional marketing will rely on storytelling and being able to connect those principles of your mission, vision, and values to actual results that are happening in and through your work. And so, um, if you're a cultural organization and you're trying to lead a particular domain of art, how do you build a connection with people emotionally to what you're doing? And so storytelling is kind of the heart of a lot of the marketing content that's going to drive institutional marketing. And when you think about the community focus, we really want the win to be deeper relationships. So we're not really asking for an immediate action when we're doing institutional marketing. We're wanting to cultivate understanding, build deeper relationship, and garner trust that we're stewarding the resources entrusted to us well. And then obviously every organization has a unique mission. And so how do we connect the work we're doing to that mission-driven impact? That'll look different for each organization, but ultimately um, at the heart of the stories we're telling, at the heart of your brand identity is your purpose or mission in the world. And so we're going to look at that in a little more detail in a few minutes. So now that we've talked a little bit about institutional marketing broadly and how it differs from more transactional product marketing, one might ask, well, why does this matter to the arts in particular? And there really are many reasons, but just to pull three forward, one is just institutional marketing and the process of preparing institutional marketing establishes a clear and consistent identity. So, one of the things in a world where there are many alternatives in terms of where people spend their time, where people spend their talents, or where people spend their treasure is why would I engage with this institution or this artist? And so part of that is understanding how to show up in the world in a distinctive way. The second kind of piece is trust and connection are kind of interrelated. But if we only engage with our audiences when we are seeking something, whether it be their participation in attending an event or visiting a museum or giving money to a cause, that will over time create some fatigue among the people you want to have a long-term relationship with. So part of the healthy mix of institutional marketing with product marketing is it develops trust and connection, which leads to kind of the third reason, which is we need that foundation of trust to be established so that when we do engage for other reasons, there already is a desire to be a part of supporting the organization and driving it forward. So, kind of leaning into those three, I wanted to spend some time thinking about strategies to build engagement. And the first kind of piece of it is kind of the brand essence. So, if we think about all of these institutional marketing principles, they're really driving back to understanding how you show up in the world relative to others. And so we want to look at how to analyze ourselves and ultimately what that would do to kind of drive our brand strategy of how we can show up in a way that articulates who we are, but in a way that's distinctive and relevant to alternatives. And once we've done that, we want to look at how we express ourselves in the world, which gets into things like how we develop messaging and our visual presentment. And then finally, once we have a clear understanding of how we show up in the world and how that takes shape from a verbal and visual perspective, how do we put it into practice and uh, explicit brand experiences that help build engagement over time with people. So each of you on the webinar today works in a particular context, and the organization that you're a part of, even if you're just representing yourself as kind of the institution, is operating in the context that we live in today. And so when we kind of prepare to do institutional marketing, the first place to start is really taking stock of the world that we live in. So as you survey the context, what's competitive? So that could be a situation of looking at what people are being drawn to right now. It could be the mood of our culture in this particular moment, different societal trends. This is kind of a broad survey of what's happening around us and what are the things that are kind of engaging people in a way that's competitive and kind of connecting with others. The second piece to look at is kind of what capabilities you bring to the table. So you think about perhaps an art museum, and it has staff that bring particular capabilities to the table. It has a collection that brings particular assets to the table. It's in a community that may have particular partners or um, board members that bring something to the table. And so when you look at taking what you have and what the world is happening in the world, you start to kind of have a sense of, okay, what do we have that is competitive and credible? And then you look at the constituents you serve and what are they looking for? So using an art museum as a perspective, you have potentially supporters. You have people that are going to have memberships. Maybe there's people that come and take classes. And so as you look at kind of what people that you serve are looking for from you, you start to say, well, what's going to be compelling to them that we have a unique capability to deliver that relative to the cultural context that we're in and the competitive context, alternatives. So in the case of a cultural institution like an art museum, what other things may be pulling people towards an alternative, being really honest about how we match up, you ultimately unearth some core insights of where what you have to offer the world and the constituents you're serving really is relevant to them. It's competitive relative to alternative. It's compelling to the constituent to ultimately seek that experience from you, and you have that capability in a differentiated way. And so part of this brand analysis as kind of pre-work to institutional marketing is we want to make sure that what we're doing really is adding to the world around us. And if we find that we're lacking differentiation, it can be a place to look at, well, are there some capabilities we need to develop to kind of meet the moment we find ourselves in and better serve the constituents that we want to continue to be part of supporting our institution. So this brand analysis is really your pre-work to understand how to begin thinking about the institution showing up in the world. The other piece is to start codifying based on those insights, how you would like to articulate your purpose and promise to the world. What are defining strengths that you want to encapsulate in some pillars, and then thinking about your personality from a tone perspective. So this is kind of a structure to think through, where at the heart of the organization is what you stand for, and based on that brand analysis, how it's different and why an audience should engage with you relative to others. So that kind of promise and purpose statement then has support in the pillars. So the pillars would be those strengths that reinforce why you indeed are uniquely positioned to be trusted and look to render either the service or experience or contribution that you offer to the community. Things like personality often come out of your organization ethos, so that can be on a spectrum. There's no one right way to show up in the world from a tone and style perspective. And so the visual and verbal communication really is an outworking of your unique DNA. And then finally, some sort of value statement where you're able to crisply say how you serve your audiences in a compelling way relative to alternatives. So just kind of showing a for example and kind of using South Arts as an example, since we're all familiar with it. If you think about South Arts from a purpose perspective and why does it exist, South Arts is seeking to amplify artists' voices and make art accessible for communities. And so when you think about that as kind of a broad reason for being, what would that look like in terms of an aim or a vision statement? You see in the South Arts brand strategy a statement that we seek to foster programs that encourage the full integration of the arts into all aspects of life, and then putting a nice bow on that from a mission statement. South Arts is advancing Southern vitality through the arts. And so if someone were to say, well, I want to support the arts. I understand you're in the arts space. What are you offering? Um, you can very quickly say, well, we're focused on advancing Southern vitality through the arts. We see the arts as being integral part of um, community life, and we have programs across this spectrum. And ultimately, we're amplifying artists' voices through that. And because this homework has been done, because this positioning has been done, you're able to very quickly, succinctly, and in a compelling way articulate um, who you are, what you do, and why it matters to the world. And so in this case, the pillars that South Arts often touches on as being essential, arts elevating the South. So we want people to understand that art is not optional. That's a pillar. Transformative, art is a catalyst for change, and you can see as you work with South Arts how that pillar plays out in different contexts. And then unifying, seeing creativity and the arts inspiring connectedness is another pillar that we seek to weave into all communication that's at the institutional marketing level for South Arts. And so this is just a for example. Obviously, as you work through this exercise, your answers to these questions would be different, but it's helpful to see within an organization that you're familiar with how ultimately that would play out. And so this analysis, brand strategy really helps you clarify how you want to show up. And then we start looking at, well, what does that mean from like a visual perspective? So we have kind of the general framework, but now we need to give it a visual expression. And so thinking about kind of the importance of a consistent visual identity, obviously we all are familiar with brands that do this well because wherever you come in contact with them, they have a really consistent expression of their brand. And so the number one reason to have a consistent visual identity is that audiences instantly identify you when they see that brand identity being presented consistently. The other piece is it can be an expression of your values. So if you look at how the personality and the mission's conveyed, you start to have a sense of what it might feel like to work with the organization, even an organization that you may never physically interact with. You think about uh, increasingly with the interconnected world we live in, the number of organizations that you never work directly with people, but you may have a bank account with a branchless bank like Ally, or you may have a investment account with a business that you've never met with in person. You start thinking about all these interactions you have with organizations and brands, how those brands show up visually creates a sense of their personality and whether you trust them. And so part of consistency is the values. The other piece is trust and credibility comes through consistency. The other piece is when you have a consistent visual identity that's supporting that clear sense of your brand essence, you ultimately are able to guide all communication. So it's very rare that an organization solely communicates on its own behalf. Typically, there's partners, whether it be PR and marketing firms, or it could even be organizations that you're partnering with that are asking you for assets and communication um, vehicles, content. And so as you do that consistently over time, you start to establish yourself in a way that regardless of who you ask, they're going to have a similar answer to the questions of who you are, what you do, why it matters, but they'll also have a similar perspective of kind of the brand ethos in terms of your personality and manner in the world. And so that connection that comes through that is where we see that loyalty and deeper audience connection developing. So in addition to what that, I guess I do a for example. So going back to South Arts as a for example, we see here a range of photographs. Some are of people in a performance setting, some are people exploring an exhibition, some are stock photos. But what you see here is while they're very different in terms of their composition, they start to have kind of a uniform theme across them. And so even things like how you curate photography, what images are going to represent you in the world. One of the things that can be tempting is to just kind of reach for something that's appropriate in the moment, but then when you step back and look at the full survey of how you're visually showing up in the world, you start to see some dissonance in that while each choice maybe in the moment felt right, they weren't coming from a proactive approach to curating your visual identity. And so there, it creates some dissonance in the minds of those you were communicating with just because they were not consistent from a tone and manner perspective. The other piece of kind of showing up in the world besides visual is obviously verbal. And there's a lot of complexity that we could talk about here, but I think the two broad categories of messaging that are really important to think about is kind of universal messaging that follows the brand, and then audience specific messaging, and how those two things need to work together. When you think about audience specific messaging, the beauty of audience specific messaging today in our digital connected world is depending on how much you know about your audience, you can get very targeted and very personalized in what you communicate with them. So just thinking about a body of audience specific messages that you would want to deliver, one of the things that can be helpful is to sit down and look at how are you curating the contacts that you have in the world. So one example would be um, a CRM solution where perhaps you have a database of people that you engage with, and that would be outstanding. Other people have more disparate lists. Maybe there's a list of people that came to an event. Maybe there's a membership database. Maybe there's an email list that's been created. And so you may be at a lot of different points on the data um, maturity continuum, but regardless of where you are in that continuum, more than just having a contact record with maybe a name, email, address, phone number, what else do you know about this individual or organization that might be helpful? And so, four kind of broad categories of segmentation that are helpful to think about is where is demographic data maybe helpful for you to more successfully fulfill your mission in the world. So thinking about how much you know about the individuals you're serving. The other piece is kind of psychographic, where we're thinking about things people care about, lifestyle, attitudes, um, other kind of attributes that are um, uh, perhaps helpful if you were seeking to find people interested in, let's say, jazz music. That would be something that's not demographic, but more psychographic in nature. And then we have kind of geographic pieces. So where do people live? Obviously, thinking about South Arch, there's times where we really want to think about the southern United States. There's sometimes we want to think about particular states. There's times we want to think about the whole country. So if you look at how you're um, building understanding about your audience, it's important to have a plan of what are the attributes you want to be collecting so that when you do have targeted audience specific communication, you can deliver it. The last piece is behavioral, which is really thinking about how people are engaging with you over time. It could be people that come to your events, it could be people that visit, it could be people that have purchased something or made a donation, what do you know in terms of behavioral interactions with the organization? And this one is super important because if someone is interacting with you and then later you interact with them but don't have um, the ability to recognize that those interactions are happening, it can weaken the interaction versus, oh, I know that you've been coming regularly to this type of event, or you've given regularly for 5 years. And then when you have that interaction, you ultimately are kind of honoring their behavioral connection with you in a way that shows that you are taking the time and energy to really build understanding about the audiences you're serving. The last piece that's kind of related to understanding who you're working with and serving, in addition to segmentation, there are places where you engage with people in an online setting where once you're connected, there's kind of an expectation of ongoing engagement. So thinking specifically about how you manage the community, and I think social media is probably the easiest example of this, where people are out there connecting with you, perhaps on your uh, Instagram account or Facebook page, and they're saying, "Hey, I'm excited about what this organization is doing," and there starts to be some engagement. The act of community management is when the institution invests the time and in some cases dedicated staff to ultimately be engaged with that community, doing really four things. The first and foremost is listening to what people are saying about you, your events, and the arts community at large. And so that listening allows you to have kind of constant feedback on the work you're doing. Is it having the result you hope? In the case of the larger arts community, it can be a feedback loop back to that brand essence and brand strategy to make sure what you're doing is still succeeding in the context that you're operating in. And so there can be opportunities with community management to really hear shifts that are happening in the wider world. The other aspect is when people are engaging with you online, there is an expectation of some type of bidirectional communication. So it could be responding to comments on your social media pages. It could be direct messaging people that have expressed something online that kind of demands a response. And there's a place here where responding promptly and authentically really shows that you care about the community that is developing online. It can also be a place to facilitate conversations between people that are maybe not connected outside your community, or amplifying the voices of others that you think um, need to be heard. So this could be a case where you have a social presence and a community that's formed, and someone in a partner organization is doing something that you want to bring attention to. And so this is a case where you could facilitate introducing individuals in your community with what's happening in another setting, and vice versa. And it kind of creates a broader sense of connectedness, and people that are following you to be um, feeling more a part of what you're doing, not only within your organization, but even with others beyond your organization. And then I think the other piece is part of community management is trying to continue growing who you're connected with, but it can be very strategic in terms of who are people that are really having a big impact in the space that you operate in. Are they connected with you? Are you connected with them? Or donors, are they aware of what you're doing? Could community management be a place where they can see the impact of their philanthropy being shared, more broadly? And then partner institutions showing that you're working well with others and connecting people to amplify the collective impact of the community that you're a part of. Community management's a really practical way to give form to that. And just a couple best practices here, just simply you know, being responsive, encouraging participation, and celebrating the audience. And so just kind of thinking what that might look like. I mean, something as simple as replying quickly to comments, direct messages, and mentions shows that you're as engaged as your audience is, and that builds trust and signals attentiveness. Participation can take lots of forms. Sometimes it can be things like questions, or polls, or some sort of giving challenge. It can be hashtags where you're trying to show um, connection with other um, initiatives, and then just celebrating when good things are happening within the community. Uplifting other organizations is something that kind of builds not only engagement with the community, but vitality to it as well. So we've talked about what is institutional marketing, and ultimately conveyed that institutional marketing are the things that help people understand the institution at the top level, or what would be called the brand essence. And then we looked at how we could define our brand essence, not only from a structural perspective, but ultimately visually and verbally, and the importance of those messages not only being created universally, but for audiences, and how audiences that are appropriately understood can be communicated to in more personalized and compelling ways. So a lot of what we've looked at so far is kind of setting the table for communicating with your audience over time. And that gets into, well, what is the content that we need to develop to really activate all that we've talked about thus far? And if we think in terms of three broad categories and the need to maintain a healthy diet between these, we will almost always be healthier if we keep a healthy diet of all three. So, thinking about evergreen content, this would be that timeless, top level, universal content that really hits on the pillars that were established in the brand strategy and remains relevant year round. So, if you encounter evergreen content that's timeless and universal in nature, you're going to be fulfilled that you understand what the organization's doing in the world, and it reinforces some of those top level messages that we want to articulate and relay consistently to all the audiences we serve. The second type of content is often kind of referred to as drumbeat, and the reason it's called drumbeat is a basically an example of how we are doing our work in the world, and it's something we can do similar to a drum on a very consistent and regular basis. So kind of keeping a beat of sharing out what's happening. So this is consistent, recurring content that reinforces kind of the results of what you're doing. And then the last piece of content is time bound. And time bound content is often where things like event marketing shows up. An event happens at a certain place, at a certain time, for certain people, at a certain cost. And so if you encounter event marketing after the event has occurred, it's no longer of use to you. It kind of decays over time. Whereas evergreen and drumbeat content do not decay. They're relevant in the future as much as they are in the moment. And so if we look at kind of each of these in turn, the evergreen content is a great place to invest in posts that show your purpose, your values, your goals, build familiarity, affinity. You could think about some of the videos that you encounter online. It's just a kind of a feel good overview. It doesn't really ask you to do anything. It's just sharing kind of a high level message, and then it's done. It can also be things though like thought leadership and things that are kind of showing what you do and why it matters. So similar to the pillars, this is something that kind of shows the goals you're trying to achieve in the world. The drumbeat content is more of those stories and spotlights that show uh, very concrete examples of your work. So just a couple for examples. If you're working in a cultural institution where different artists are coming through to share their work, you could ultimately have a spotlight just celebrating the work of um, each artist that's on view or performing. And the drum beat would say, okay, we're going to do one spotlight a week or one a month. And then it creates a structure for you to follow to ultimately share um, about the artist that either you're supporting or that you're a part of an artist's community. Similarly, those that are supporting you from a funding perspective, highlighting why they gave, highlighting the impact of gifts, um, could be impact stories, people that have interacted with you and had a positive experience, or more of a testimonial structure. Could be an impact story with its data driven. We've touched X number of lives this year, or we've reduced waste this much by adopting these sustainable practices. Or it could just be programs. Maybe you have a portfolio of programs, and the drumbeat content could ultimately allow you to, over the course of a year or 2 years, say, we're going to have a rotation of which programs we spotlight, and it creates a structure where every program gets attention at some point, but they don't all seek to get attention at the same time. And so it creates a lot of clarity for people that are interacting with you to learn more about you in a way that's measured and digestible over time. And then the last piece, which is often the easiest type of content to generate, is more the time bound, where you're trying to promote an event such as a workshop or a conference or performance, or maybe there's a webinar like today where you're invited to register and participate, but then tomorrow it's over. And so then the content has lost its value. Similarly, holidays, obviously we want to celebrate holidays. That should be part of our communications plan. But after the holidays passed, then this content begins to decay from a utility perspective. And so while we certainly need time-bound content to be part of our content mix, the caution from an institutional marketing perspective is, if time-bound content is the only type of content that we're leaning into, the risk and impact to the organization is that people that you're serving may not really have a clear understanding of your mission, and their perception of you may be really defined by these time-bound experiences, the events, for example, rather than the institutional impact you're having in the community and the wider world. So that's kind of the conceptual underpinnings of how to prepare to be part of institutional marketing yourself. I wanted to spend the last part of our time together looking at some tools and templates that can be helpful for kind of guiding this type of work over time, and then kind of close with answering any questions that the participants have put in the Q&A. So we're going to look at 4 tools and templates, and then take some questions. So kind of the first tool that is important is thinking about the communications triangle. So as we exit today's webinar, go back to our day in the life work of communicating with others, one of the key planning tools that I come back to again and again is when someone approaches me saying something like, hey, I want to put something on the website, or I want to put something on social media, or we need to send out an email. Those are examples of someone kind of leading with media. They've kind of decided what they want to do from a media perspective, but we haven't yet addressed, well, who are we trying to speak to and what message might be appropriate at this point in time. And so, what the triangle does is it really forces us to think through any communications that we're doing and to ask ourselves, all right, are we clear on who we want this message to be delivered to? And then in terms of the media, well, what media is available to us that is most effective at reaching them? And then what message do we want to deliver? So you could think of kind of a silly example, but let's say we wanted to deliver a message that year-end giving statements will be mailed tomorrow. If we put that on social media or the website, that would hit a lot of people that it's not relevant to and be a little curious. Whereas maybe sending an email to anyone that made a donation throughout the year would be logical, or sending them a letter with their giving statement. That's a silly example, but I think it's helpful to think about the audience really helping us decide what media is appropriate. Thinking about the performing arts, knowing you have a large database of people that are interested in the performing arts, but you have a particular type of performance coming. If you knew that certain people in your audience really cared about that, maybe there's something that could be done that's more targeted and more personalized to those that are the most likely to come. And then ultimately, depending on what your goals are, call, uh, developing a message that's appropriate for your goal, and the audience you're seeking to speak with is something that you can do once you're clear on who you're speaking to and what media type you're going to use. But going back to that content mix, this is also helpful over time to kind of recognize if all of the communication we're doing, the message, what we're saying, what we're asking people to do, if it's always falling into that transactional or more product marketing um, bucket, then that also should kind of cause pause that we maybe need to think of other outreach that we could do to this same audience so that they get an appropriate diet of that evergreen drumbeat and time-bound content so that they develop a holistic understanding of us. And so the kind of the last piece of kind of message development is to be sensitive to how our messages may be received by the audience we're sending it to, if it's always of a particular type of content. Kind of leaning into the point I was trying to make a moment ago related to what audience are you trying to speak to. The other tool that's super helpful as you're developing audience specific messages is to think about how you're going to tailor your communication when you're speaking to a different audience. So here, just creating kind of four broad buckets on the left of a general audience that we're not sure who they are, donors and sponsors, people that are more financially connected to us, maybe educators and students, people that want to learn from us, and maybe local and regional partners, people that are connected to us. What you can see in that middle column in terms of what they care about is, as we think about what maybe a donor thinks about relative to a student, we quickly recognize that they're thinking about different things often. So a donor might be thinking about the impact and transformational impact of a gift, whereas a student may be just looking for opportunities to learn or to get mentorship, whereas local regional partner may be thinking more about economic development or community vitality. And so, as we understand the motivations of the audience that we're communicating with, it can help shape institutional messages that are more compelling. So, just some examples here. Speaking to donors, kind of indicating that their support is driving impact. and making the arts accessible and meaningful for everyone. That's a very motivating message to someone that cares about impact and community transformation. Whereas maybe educators and students, a message really about shaping the next generation of artists, innovators, and creative thinkers would be more resonant, because that's really what they're either interested in doing. That's what's motivating them to be connected with you. Or in the case of educators, that's really their passion relative to the arts. And so the nice thing about creating a messaging matrix for your specific audiences and getting agreement within your organization about how to craft and relay institutional messages is that when you've done that, it's not that you're necessarily going to use the same message in the same form over and over again. There are some cases where some key messages may be reused regularly, but what's more helpful is recognizing if I'm talking to this audience and they care about these things, my message needs to have a flavor like this, and it can be a really helpful aid in not only planning communication, but auditing our communication over time to say, let's look at how we're engaging with educators and students. What are we doing to really serve that constituency? Going back to your brand analysis of what you're offering them that's credible, what's happening in the context that they're also interacting with, and seeing, okay, what are we saying to them that's really resonating and relevant? Coming back to this matrix, seeing the messages you crafted around those strengths that you offer to them, and then saying, are we hitting the right note with them, and seeing the results that we would like to. It can be a great tool to really assess whether our work is staying kind of true to the strategy that was developed in that foundational phase of this work. The other tool that's related to the messaging itself is when and where do you deliver the messages. So this is kind of a one-dimensional content calendar that's really not specifying particular channels. So you could do a content calendar that included all the different communication channels, or you could do a content calendar like this for each communications channel you choose to have. So let's just imagine you have a weekly email, and this is your content calendar for your weekly email. So what the content calendar is seeking to do is say, okay, over the next 9 weeks, what are we going to talk about when, to kind of create a plan for the material that needs to go in our weekly email. And so this case on the left, we've established that we've got 3 pillars. We've established that we want to have drumbeat content related to our partners, our donors, and our staff. And we want to acknowledge a certain set of events and a certain number of holidays over the course of the year. And so we have our events calendar and our holidays to the side. And so when we look at, okay, what's happening over the next 2 to 3 months, let's map out our content. By having this structured approach, we've already said that we want to talk about why we're essential and why art is essential. We've already said we want to talk about how art's transformative to communities and how it's unifying and creates connectedness. So those pillars we've already conceptually agreed to, but now we're saying week 1, we're going to hit the first one, week 2, we're going to hit the second one, week 3, we're going to hit the third one, in terms of an object of content that we're going to put in our email newsletter. And so by having that structure, it's forcing us to say, okay, well, how this week are we going to show that art is essential? Could be that's a story spotlight on a partner. Could be it's a particular artist. Could be it's just a statement of your purpose. There's lots of different ways that this could take shape, but in all cases, it's grounded in a commitment to be evergreen in its nature. Similarly, when you think about drumbeat content, if we said, okay, every month we're going to highlight a partner, every month we're going to highlight a donor, you can kind of see every 3 to 4 weeks we've got that pacing of the spotlights. Well, who are our partners? So you make a list and you say, okay, we've got 10 or 12 partners. How do we want to spotlight them? And you start to build out a body of information of how you could uh, highlight your partners, your donors, your staff, artists that you're connected with, whatever those drumbeat elements that you've established are. And by doing that, something that can feel like a white sheet of paper and a little overwhelming, which is what are we going to put in the newsletter this week, or what are we going to post on social media, or what do we put on the website, um, becomes very clear. We're working to reinforce our institutional values. We're working to showcase our impact across partners, donors, highlighting the people that make us who we are. We're going to celebrate a certain set of holidays. We're going to execute an event plan. And so, as those things happen and you start to structure them in this way, it makes the job of communicating strategically and doing institutional marketing on a day-to-day basis much easier and much uh, more measurable, because we have a plan. We're executing against the plan. And going back to the title of today's webinar, it's more than just events. We have events, we're communicating events. That's part of what we're doing, but it's now surrounded by these other messages and stories that ultimately paint a fuller picture of who we are, what we do, and why it matters to the community that we serve. The other tool that I just wanted to leave us with, and this is kind of the last tool before we open it up for questions, but when you think about having a content calendar, thinking about what you're going to convey, when you look out to different media channels, there's lots of different ways to plan, but one model that we find particularly helpful is the peso model, where you look at where there are paid opportunities to get your message in front of your audience, where there are earned media opportunities to get your message in front of audiences. What are you doing with what you control, your website, your social properties, email, and then thinking about the shared environments where when we post something on Instagram or Facebook, we're kind of inside a platform that we don't control. So often social media actually lives in the shared bucket, but also co-branding, where are you partnered with someone where they may share your story on their property, their own properties, which gives you lift there. So from a planning perspective, obviously you want to start with what you own and make sure you're doing what you can to control that. The other place that's a nice kind of step two is thinking about social media and partners and how they can ultimately help you amplify your message. Earned media, with word of mouth being the most powerful. When people are saying good things about you based on their interactions with you in person, based on their interactions with you on your own channels, and maybe seeing you on partner sites or social properties, is for sure the most powerful way to get your message out. But there are other ways in more structured PR and marketing to have media mentions, press releases, and other things that allow you to amplify your message at low or no cost. And then there's paid opportunities, and I think this is a place where there's nearly limitless possibilities today in terms of how to get your message out through sponsorship and paid advertising. But there are also ways to do that that are pretty lightweight, in that there are ways to build upon your social property, and when you have a really important message, to make sure it gets pushed out through modest paid activity in front of the people you care about. And so while I gave the content calendar example, thinking in terms of an email calendar. This could be applied at the institutional level. It could be applied at each platform that you have, or thinking about it as a concept. All of the peso media types are places where you can be really meditated about getting your message in front of the audience you seek to be connected to. It just requires a measure of creativity and planning to ultimately activate all these channels, but certainly would start with the ones you own and control first, because those are obviously the easiest. So 4 tools to kind of activate the plan. I'm gonna now ask Lisa if we had any questions come in during our discussion.
In the Q&A pod, we have, do you have any recommendations, tips, or hints at automating some of these processes?
Yeah, so the question I heard is there a way to automate these processes?
Yes.
Yeah, great question. So um, the short answer is absolutely. A lot of what we just were looking at with some of those tools and templates are ways to prepare the communication that you seek to do over time. And so, in terms of having a content development supply chain where you're saying, okay, we know what we want to create, and then kind of building that into a process where you create the assets and then schedule them to happen over time. Or you think about like a new member engagement. If you choreographed a sequence of interactions you wanted to have with, let's say, a new member, the work of setting that up the first time obviously would take effort, but then to build that into a process where when they are added to your CRM, they get a series of emails over time that are consistent and kind of follow a pattern is absolutely something that can be done.
Thank you. The next question, can you talk about brand journalism a tiny bit?
Sure. So brand journalism, thinking about how you kind of enter into public discussions and talk about the work you're doing. So sometimes that can be on your own site where you're doing some either blog writing or putting some content out that's kind of speaking into the cultural moment that we're in. Or it can be a type of ad placement where you um, maybe there's a newsletter or some context that you'd like to appear in, and you basically have a paid placement within the context of that outlet where you can tell your story. So you may see, if you're looking at some websites, it'll say sponsored content, but when you look at the content, it appears as though it's just an article like any other article that's appearing on the site. And that's a way to kind of cut through the noise of an ad that people sometimes develop kind of blindness to. And if they're on a site kind of learning and reading articles, and you pop up through a sponsored placement, they'll engage with you in that context where they may have not engaged with an ad that said, click here to learn more. They may not have done that.
All right, thank you. Next question, what tools do you recommend for automation?
Well, that's a good question. So I would say the basic automations that are increasingly available in most CRM and email marketing platforms do a great job. I would say the most commonly used platforms that we're seeing are Salesforce Marketing Cloud, HubSpot, MailChimp are 3 that I encounter regularly. Sometimes people will use their donation platforms. So the giving platforms often will have email automations baked into them as well. So that's another place where you may have already invested in a tool that has the capability. I think in some cases, a simple but sound approach is every bit as effective as a really complex one, in that if you put yourself in the shoes of the recipient of communication, you want, if you take the time to engage with communication that's coming from an institution, you want it to have some value to you. So if you are critiquing what you're sharing, and it's always value creating in terms of they have a better understanding of you, they have maybe a positive emotional response to the work that's happening, and then you pair that with the need that people forget over time unless they're reminded, there has to be some sort of cadence of communication that's appropriate. So if you're new, having kind of a series of communications that then trickles off to something that's more episodic but consistent. Or if you come back and have a re-engagement, and then there's some additional more frequent communication after that, whether it be a gift or attending something, that feels very genuine to what would make sense. What you want to avoid at all costs is over communicating in a way that the recipient isn't going to find it helpful to them. And at that point, you have the risk of people disconnecting from you and not wishing to receive your communication, and then you lose them. So I would offer that if you're seeing people unsubscribing from your email list, or people kind of disconnecting on social, that could be a clue that you're creating content that people aren't ascribing value to, or the frequency is inappropriately high given the relationship they're seeking to have with you.
Right. What is the best way to get media to pay attention? We are having the worst time getting stories picked up lately.
Yeah, that is challenging. I think, well, first of all, it's not you, so don't take it personally. I think one of the things that's really challenging with media today in terms of picking up a press release, coming out and covering something, is the actual entities are just skeletal crews. So you have a situation where, due to consolidation and just changing media habits, organizations that used to have capacity to intake stories, to maybe even come out and cover events, are now at a place where they just don't have the bandwidth. And so what can be helpful is to really tee it up for them, where you basically provide everything. Maybe a video snippet from the event, pictures, it's so turnkey that it doesn't look like work for them to take your story and run with it. So I think it's really symptomatic of just the organization's capacity to do that work, and less about them not caring about your story. You do have to make sure your story's interesting to their audience. So knowing how to position it is the other piece, that it has to be something that they think is going to be of interest to their audience. But I think if you're doing that, the next step would be just to really plate it well so that it's easy to be activated by the media outlet you're engaging.
Can we use AI ethically to support marketing initiatives?
Uh, The short answer is yes, you can. I think the thing with AI is understanding kind of what you're using it for, and how raw the output you're taking is being used. So if you think about what AI is doing, it's taking the collective material of others and putting it into these large language models that it then leverages to answer questions that are asked of it. And so one of the risks and something that would make it unethical is if you're reusing the work of someone else as your own, but you actually didn't do it. I think if you look at AI tools in terms of giving you ideas and kind of accelerating your work, it does a great job. So um, I'll often use AI to kind of create an outline. They often will give you links to where they got their source content. You can go there and look more, and then kind of reference where their source material came from if you're using it. So it's definitely an emerging space, but I would definitely say that AI, particularly in the communication space, is accelerating a lot of planning and kind of base work. So there's a good comment that just came in the chat. Some organizations do have policies um, around it, so you obviously want to adhere to your corporate policy. The other thing we're seeing a lot of, not so much in the art space, but in some corporate spaces, is kind of using AI within closed models. So you think about like a hospital, they may be deploying AI where the source material is only their past work that's from within their institution. So if they're using AI for, let's say, diagnostic purposes, they could ethically say that 100% of the source material was something that came from their enterprise and is therefore more trustworthy than something that came from the open internet.
All right. And our last question, how effective is having a blog these days with so many social media sites available?
Well, so I think blogging is a form of long form content. So I think going back to that kind of content creation path, my recommendation is to try not to think about content creation solely in the context of where you're intending to use it the first time, but thinking more about what's the kinds of content I need to be creating that's going to serve my audience, and then using something like a blog post as a longer form piece to be the source of snippets, maybe for social media, maybe for email. And so you basically take longer form content like a blog post and then use it as a source of snippets for other channels to ultimately maximize your time. I'm an advocate for blogs. I think they're helpful for people that are really looking to deeply understand you and kind of go beyond a surface level view. They're also super beneficial for search engine optimization, kind of having your topic and your voice and authority in the space being current and present online. And then going back to AI is using um, web content to build their models. And so as you blog, yes, they're going to take some of your content and maybe regurgitate it in ways you didn't anticipate, but they also may provide a link referencing your site and you'll have traffic come back to you didn't anticipate. Right now, we're seeing a really strong uptick in web traffic to all our client sites that are coming from AI engines where people are getting those preview answers and then wanting to go deeper, clicking the link, coming over, and being very high intent visitors that are really serious about the work and more likely than the average web visitor to do something. So interestingly, even though AI probably did result in fewer people taking that click, the ones that did are proving to be super valuable.
Okay, and I see one raised hand from Marcia Benson. Let me scroll to find her so I can allow her to speak. Okay, let's see. Hillary, are you able to give her that permission? I don't see her name here.
Let me see. Yes. I think she can talk now.
Okay. Hi, Marcia, do you have a question?
You'll need to unmute yourself.
Well, maybe that was an accident. While we're waiting for Marcia, I do want to share the QR code for our survey, just in case you missed the link. And again, we appreciate you all being here with us. So if you could just fill that out, we'd be most appreciative. Dan, do you have anything in closing you'd like to add?
Just really appreciate everyone's attention today and engagement. Institutional marketing takes work, but ultimately all of you are pouring into great institutions, and would love to see you be able to amplify your impact by adopting some of the approaches we covered today, and happy to hear how it works in your particular context. So thanks for your time, and wish you well in applying it in the days ahead.
Okay, and with that, our webinar comes to a close. We appreciate you all being here with us today. And as we stated earlier, this webinar was recorded, so you will receive a link in your email. It will also be posted under our resources section on the South Arts website. And without anything further, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next webinar. Bye.
Thank you.